At dinner outdoors on the back terrace, with darkness coming on so gradually that the evening seemed to the Swede stalled, stopped, suspended, provoking in him a distressing sense of nothing more to follow, of nothing ever to happen again, of having entered a coffin carved out of time from which he would never be extricated. There were also the Umanovs, Marcia and Barry, and the Saltzmans, Sheila and Shelley. Only a few hours had passed since the Swede learned that it was Sheila Saltzman, the speech therapist who had hidden Mary after the bombing. The Saltzmans had not told him. And if only they had called when she showed up there, done their duty to him, then he could not complete the thought. If he were to contemplate head-on all that would not have happened had Mary never been permitted to become a fugitive from justice, couldn't complete that thought either. He sat at dinner, eternally inert, immobilized, ineffectual, inert, estranged from those expansive blessings of openness and vigor conferred on him by his hyper-optimism. A lifetime's agility as a businessman, as an athlete, as a U.S. Marine, had in no way conditioned him for being a captive, confined to a futureless box where he was not to think about what had become of his daughter, was not to think about how the Saltzmans had assisted her, was not to think about what had become of his wife. He was supposed to get through dinner not thinking about the only things he could think about. He was supposed to do this forever. However much he might crave to get out, he was to remain stopped dead in the moment in that box. Otherwise, the world would explode. Barry Umanov, once the Swede's teammate and closest high school friend, was a law professor at Columbia, and whenever the folks flew up from Florida, Barry and his wife were invited for dinner. Seeing Barry always made his father happy, in part because Barry, the son of an immigrant tailor, had evolved into a university professor, but also because Lulevov, wrongly, though the Swede pretended not to care, credited Barry Umanov with getting Seymour to lay down his baseball glove and enter the business. Every summer, Lou reminded Barry, counselor, as he had been calling him since high school, of the good deed Barry had done for the Lvov family by the example of his professional seriousness. And Barry would say that if he had been 100th the ball player the Swede was, nobody would have gotten him near a law school. It was Barry and Marcia Umanov with whom Mary had stayed overnight a couple of times in New York before the Swede finally forbade her going into New York at all. And it was Barry from whom the Swede had sought legal advice after Mary's disappearance from Old Grimrock. Barry took him to meet Shevitz, the Manhattan litigator. When the Swede asked Shevitz to level with him what was the worst that could be laid on his daughter if she was apprehended and found guilty, he was told 7 to 10 years. But, said Shevitz, if it's done in the passion of the anti-war movement, if it's done accidentally, if everything was done to try to prevent anyone from getting hurt. And do we know she did it alone? We don't. Do we even know she did it? We don't. No significant political history, a lot of rhetoric, a lot of violent rhetoric, but is this a kid who, on her own, would kill someone deliberately? How do we know she made the bomb or set the bomb? To make a bomb, you have to be fairly sophisticated. Could this kid light a match? She was excellent in science, the Swede said. For her chemistry project, she got an A. Did she make a bomb for her chemistry project? No, of course not. No. Then we don't know, do we? Whether she could light a match or not. It might have been all rhetoric to her. We don't know what she did, and we don't know what she meant to do. We don't know anything, and neither does anyone else. She could have won the Westinghouse Science Prize, and we wouldn't know. What can be proved? Probably very little. The worst, since you ask me, is 7 to 10, but let's assume she's treated as a juvenile. Under juvenile law, she gets 2 to 3, and even if she pleads guilty to something, the record is sealed and nobody can get at it. Look, it all depends on her role in the homicide. It doesn't have to be too bad. If the kid will come in, even if she did have something to do with it, we might get her off with practically nothing. And until a few hours ago, when he learned that on the Oregon commune, making bombs was her specialty, when from her own unstuttering mouth he heard that it was not a single, possibly accidental death for which she was responsible, but the cold-hearted murder of 4 people, Shevitz's words was sometimes all he had to keep him from giving up hope. This man didn't deal in fairy tales. You could see that as soon as you walked into his office, Shevitz was somebody who liked to be proved right, somebody whose wish to prevail was his vocation. Barry had made it clear beforehand that Shevitz was not a guy interested in making people feel good. He was not addressing the Swede's yearnings when he said, "If the kid will come in, we might get her off." But this was back when they thought they could find a jury that would believe she didn't know how to light a match. This was before 5 o'clock that afternoon. Barry's wife, Marcia, a literature professor in New York, was by even the Swedes' generous estimate a difficult person. A militant nonconformist of staggering self-certainty, much given to sarcasm and calculatedly apocalyptic pronouncements designed to bring discomfort to the lords of the earth. There was nothing she did or said that didn't make clear where she stood. She had barely to move a muscle, swallow while you were speaking, tap with a fingernail on the arm of her chair, even nod her head as if she were in total agreement to inform you that nothing you were saying was correct. To encompass all her convictions, she dressed in large block-printed caftans, an extensive woman for whom a disheveled appearance was less a protest against convention than a sign that she was a thinker who got right to the point. No nonsense. No commonplace stood between her and the harshest truths. Yet, Barry enjoyed her. Since they couldn't have been more dissimilar, perhaps theirs was one of those so-called attractions of opposites. In Barry, there was such thoughtfulness and kindly concern ever since he was a kid, and the poorest kid the Swede had known. He'd been a diligent, upright gentleman, a solid catcher in baseball, eventually the class valedictorian, who, after a stint in the service, went to NYU on the GI Bill. That's where he met and married Marcia Schwartz. It was hard for the Swede to understand how a strongly built, not unhandsome guy like Barry could free himself at the age of 22 from the desire to be with anybody else in the world but Marcia Schwartz, already so opinionated as a college girl that the Swede had to battle in her presence to stay awake. Yet Barry liked her, sat there and listened to her. Didn't at all seem to care that she was a slob, dressed even in college like somebody's grandmother and with those buoyant eyes unnervingly enlarged by the heavy spectacles. Dawn's opposite in every way. For Marcia to have spawned a self-styled revolutionary, yes. Had Mary been raised within earshot of Marcia's mouth, but Dawn? Pretty, petite, unpolitical Dawn? Why Dawn? Where do you look for the cause? Where's the explanation for this mismatch? Was it nothing more than a trick played by their genes? During the march on the Pentagon, the march to stop the war in Vietnam, Marcia Umanov had been thrown into a paddy wagon with some 20 other women and, very much to her liking, locked up overnight in a D.C. jail where she didn't stop talking protest talk till they were all let out in the morning. If Mary had been her daughter, things would make sense. If only Mary had fought a war of words, fought the world with words alone like this strident Yenta. Then Mary's would not be a story that begins and ends with a bomb, but another story entirely. But a bomb? A bomb? A bomb tells the whole fucking story. Hard to grasp Barry's marrying that woman. Maybe it had to do with his family's being so poor. Who knows? Her animus, her superior airs, the sense she gave of being unclean, everything intolerable to the Swede in a friend, let alone in a mate, well, those were the very characteristics that seemed to enliven Barry's appreciation of his wife. It was a puzzle, it truly was, how one perfectly reasonable man could adore what a second perfectly reasonable man couldn't abide for half an hour. But just because it was a puzzle, the Swede tried his best to restrain his aversion and neutralize his judgment and see Marcia Umanov as simply an oddball from another world, the academic world, the intellectual world, where always to be antagonizing people and challenging whatever they said was apparently looked on with admiration. What it was they got out of being so negative was beyond him. It seemed to him far more productive when everybody grew up and got over that. Still, that didn't mean that Marcia was really out to needle people and work them over just because she was so often needling people and working them over. He couldn't call her vicious Once he recognized that this was the way she was accustomed to socializing in Manhattan. Moreover, he couldn't believe that Barry Umanoff, who at one time was closer to him than his own kid brother, could marry someone vicious. As usual, the Swede's default reaction to not being able to fathom cause and effect, as opposed to his father's reflexive suspiciousness, was to fall back on a lifelong strategy and become tolerant and charitable. And so, he was content to chalk up Marcia as difficult, allowing at worst, well, let's just say she's no bargain. But Dawn loathed her because she knew herself to be loathed by Marcia for having been Miss New Jersey. Dawn couldn't stand people who made that story the whole of her story. And Marcia was especially exasperating because the pleasure of explaining Dawn by a story that had never explained her, and hardly explained her now, was so smugly exhibited. When they'd all first met, Dawn told the Umanoffs about her father's heart attack and how no money was coming into the house and how she realized that the door to college was about to be slammed shut on her brother. The whole scholarship story. But none of it made Miss New Jersey seem like anything but a joke to Marcia Umanoff. Marcia barely bothered to hide the fact that when she looked at Dawn Lvov, she saw no one there. That she thought Dawn pretentious for raising cows, thought she was doing it for the image. It wasn't a serious operation. Dawn ran 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. As far as Marcia was concerned, it was a pretty house and garden fantasy contrived by a rich, silly woman who lived not in stinky, smelling New Jersey, no, who lived in the country. Dawn loathed Marcia because of her undisguised superiority to the Lvovs' wealth, to their taste, to the rural way of life they loved, and loathed her beyond loathing because she was convinced that privately Marcia was altogether pleased about what Mary was alleged to have done. The privileged place in Marcia's feelings went to the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese. She never for a moment compromised her political convictions or her compassionate comprehension of international affairs, not even when she saw from 6 inches away the misery that had befallen her husband's oldest friend. And this was what led Dawn to make the accusations that the Swede knew to be false. Not because he could swear to Marcia's honorableness, but because for him the probity of Barry Umanoff was beyond question. I will not have her in this house. A pig has more humanity in her than that woman does. I don't care how many degrees she has. She is callous and she is blind. She is the most blind, self-involved, narrow-minded, obnoxious, so-called intelligent person I have ever met in my life, and I will not have her in my house. Well, I can't very well ask Barry to come by himself. Then Barry can't come. Barry has to come. I want Barry to come. My father gets a terrific boot out of seeing Barry here. He expects to see Barry here. It's Barry, Dawn, who got me to Shevitz. But that woman took Mary in. Don't you see that's where Mary went? To New York, to them. That's who gave her a hiding place. Somebody did. Somebody had to. A real bomb thrower in her house. That excited her. She hid her from us, hid Mary from her parents when she needed her parents most. Marcia Umanoff is the one who sent her underground. Mary didn't want to stay there even before. She stayed exactly twice at Barry's. That was it. The third time she never showed up. You don't remember. She went somewhere else to stay and never showed up at the Umanoffs again. Marcia is the one, Seymour. Who else has her connections? Wonderful father this one, wonderful father that one, pouring blood on the draft records. So cozy she is with her war-resistor priests. So buddy-buddy, but they're not priests, Seymour. Priests are not great forward-thinking liberals. Otherwise, they don't become priests. It's just that that's not what priests are supposed to do. No more than they're supposed to stop praying for the boys who go over there. What she likes about these priests is that these aren't priests. She doesn't love them because they're in church. She loves them because they are doing something that, in her estimation, taints the church. Because they are doing something outside the church, outside the regular role of the priests. That these priests are an affront to what people like me grew up with. That's what she likes. That's what this fat bitch likes about everything. I hate her guts. Fine. Fine with me. Hate her all you want, he said. But not for something she hasn't done. She didn't do it, Dawn. You're driving yourself crazy with something that cannot be true. And it wasn't true. It wasn't Marcia who had taken Mary in. Marcia was all talk, always had been. Senseless, ostentatious talk, words with the sole purpose of scandalously exhibiting themselves. Uncompromising, quarrelsome words expressing little more than Marcia's intellectual vanity and her odd belief that all her posturing added up to an independent mind. It was Sheila Salzman who'd taken Mary in. The Morristown speech therapist, the pretty, kindly, soft-spoken young woman who for a while had given Mary so much hope and confidence. The teacher who provided Mary all those strategies to outwit her impediment and replaced Audrey Hepburn as her heroine. In the months when Dawn was on sedatives and was in and out of the hospital, in the months before Sheila and the Swede would back off from ignoring the whole responsible orientation of their lives, in the months before these two well-ordered, well-behaved people could bring themselves to stop endangering their precious stability, Sheila Salzman had been Swede Lvov's mistress, the first and last. Mistress. A most un-Swede-like acquisition. Incongruous, implausible, even ridiculous. Mistress does not quite make sense in the untarnished context of that life, and yet, for the 4 months after Mary disappeared, that is what Sheila was to him. At dinner, the conversation was about Watergate and about Deep Throat. Except for the Swedes' parents and the Orcutts, everybody at the table had been to see the X-rated movie starring a young porno actress named Linda Lovelace. The picture was no longer playing only in the adult houses, but had become a sensation in neighborhood theaters all over Jersey. What surprised him, Shelley Salzman was saying, was that the electorate, who overwhelmingly chose as president and vice president Republican politicians hypocritically pretending to deep moral piety, should make a hit out of a movie that so graphically caricatured acts of oral sex. Maybe it's not the same people, said Dawn, who are going to the movie. It's McGovernites? Marcia Yumanoff asked her. At this table it is, answered Dawn, already inflamed at the outset of dinner by this woman she could not bear. Please, said the Swede's father. What these two things have got to do with each other is a mystery to me. I don't know why you people pay good money to go to that trash in the first place. It's pure trash, am I right, Counselor? He looked to Barry for support. It's a kind of trash, Barry said. Then why do you let it into your lives? It leaks in, Mr. Lvov, Bill Orcutt said to him pleasantly, whether we like it or not. Whatever is out there leaks in. It pours in. It's not the same out there anymore, in case you haven't heard. Oh, I heard, sir. I come from the late city of Newark. I heard more than I want to hear. Look, the Irish ran the city, the Italians ran the city, now let the coloureds run the city. That's not my point. I got nothing against that. It's the colored people's turn to reach into the till. I wasn't born yesterday. In Newark, corruption is the name of the game. What is new, number one, is race. Number two, taxes. Add that to the corruption, there's your problem. $7.76. That is the tax rate in the city of Newark. I don't care how big you are or how small you are. I'm here to tell you that you cannot run a business with those kind of taxes. General Electric already moved out in 1953. GE, Westinghouse, Breyers down on Raymond Boulevard, Cellulite, all left the city. Every one of them big employees. And before the riots, before the racial hatred, they got out. Race is just the icing on the cake. Streets aren't cleaned, burned out cars nobody takes away, people in abandoned buildings, fires in abandoned buildings, unemployment, filth, poverty, more filth, more poverty, schooling, non-existent, schools, a disaster. On every street corner, dropouts, doing nothing, dropouts, dealing drugs, dropouts, looking for trouble. The projects don't get me started on the projects. Police on the take, every kind of disease known to man. As far back as the summer of '64, I told my son, Seymour, get out. Get out, I said. But he won't listen. Patterson goes up, Elizabeth goes up, Jersey City goes up. You got to be blind in both eyes not to see what's next. And I told this to Seymour. Newark is the next watch. I told him. You heard it here first. The summer of '67. I predicted it in those very words. Didn't I, Seymour? Called it practically to the day. That is true, the Swede acknowledged. Manufacturing is finished in Newark. Newark is finished. The riots were just as bad, if not worse, in Washington and Los Angeles and Detroit, but mark my words, Newark will be the city that never comes back again. And gloves in America, kaput, also finished. Only my son hangs on. 5 more years, and outside of the government contracts, there won't be a pair of gloves made in America. Not in Puerto Rico either. They're already in the Philippines, the big boys. It will be India, it will be Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh. You'll see every place around the world making gloves except here. The union alone didn't break us, however. Sure, the union didn't understand, but some of the manufacturers didn't understand either. I wouldn't pay the sons of a bitches another 5 cents. And here the guy is driving a Cadillac and sitting in Florida in the winter. No, a lot of manufacturers didn't think straight, but the unions never understood the competition from overseas, and there is no doubt in my mind that the unions speeded up the demise of the glove industry by being tough and making it so that people couldn't make money. The union rate on piecework ran a lot of people out of business or offshore. In the 30s, our competition was heavy from Czechoslovakia, from Austria, from Italy. The war came along and saved us. Government contracts, 77 million pairs of gloves purchased by the quartermaster. The glove man got rich, but then the war ended, and I tell you, as far back as that, even in the good old days, it was already the beginning of the end. Our downfall was that we could never compete with overseas. We hastened it because there wasn't some good judgment on either side, but it could not be saved regardless. The only thing that could have stopped it, and I was not for this, I don't think you can stop world trade, and I don't think you should try, but the only thing that could have stopped it is if we put up trade barriers, making it not just 5% duties, but 30%, 40%. Lou, said his wife, what does any of this have to do with this movie? This movie? These goddamn movies? Well, of course, they're not new either. You know, we had a pinochle club. This is years ago. You remember the Friday night club? And we had a guy in the electrical business. You remember, Seymour. Abe Sachs? Sure, the Swede said. Well, I hate to tell you, but he had all these kinds of movies right in his house. Sure, they existed. On Mulberry Street, where we used to go with the kids to eat chinks, was a saloon where you could go in and you buy whatever filth you wanted. And you know something? I watched 5 minutes, and I went back in the kitchen, and to his credit, so did my dear friend. He's dead now. He was a wonderful fellow. My mind is gone. The glove cut. What the hell was his? Was it Al Haberman? Said his wife. Right. The two of us just played gin for an hour until there was this hullabaloo in the living room where they were showing the movie. And what happened was the whole damn movie, the camera, the whole, what do you call it? Caught fire. I couldn't have been happy. That is, 30, 40 years ago. And to this day, I remember sitting with Al Haberman playing cards while the rest of them were drooling like idiots in the living room. He was by now telling this to Orcutt, directing his remarks solely at him, as though, despite the evidence of the drunken woman Lou Lvov was sitting next to, despite the incontrovertible evidence of so much of Jewish lore, the anarchy of a high-born Gentile remained essentially unimaginable to him. And Orcutt, therefore, of everyone at the table, could best appreciate the platitude he was getting at. They're supposed to be the dependable ones in control of themselves, aren't they? They marked the territory, didn't they? They made the rules, the very rules that the rest of us who came here have agreed to follow. Could Orcutt fail to admire him for sitting in that kitchen, sitting there patiently playing gin, until at last the forces of good overcame the forces of evil, and that dirty movie went up in smoke back in 1935? Well, I'm sorry to say, Mr. Lvov, that you can't keep it out any longer just by playing cards, Orcutt told him. That was a way to keep it out that doesn't exist any longer. Keep what out? Lou Lvov asked. What you're talking about, said Orcutt. The permissiveness. Abnormality cloaked his ideology. The perpetual protest. Time was you could step away from it. You could make a stand against it. As you point out, you could even just play cards against it. But these days it's getting harder and harder to find relief. The grotesque is supplanting everything commonplace that people love about this country. Today, to be what they call repressed is a source of shame to people, as not to be repressed used to be. That is true. That is true. Let me tell you about Al Haberman. You want to talk about the old-style world and what used to be? Let's talk about Al. A wonderful fellow, Al, a handsome fellow, got rich cutting gloves. You could in those days. A husband and wife who had any ambition could get a few skins and make some gloves, ended up in a small room. 2 men cutting, a couple of women sewing. They could make gloves. They could press them and ship them. They made money. They were their own bosses. They could work 60 hours a week. Way back when Henry Ford was paying the unheard of sum of $1 a day, a fine table cutter would make $5 a day. But look, in those days, it was nothing for an ordinary woman to own 20, 25 pairs of gloves. Quite common. A woman used to have a glove wardrobe, different gloves for every outfit, different colors, different styles, different lengths. A woman wouldn't go outside without a pair in any weather. In those days, it wasn't unusual for a woman to spend 2-3 hours at the glove cut and try on 30 pairs of gloves. And the lady behind the desk had a sink, and she would wash her hands between each color. In a fine lady's glove, we had quarter sizes into the 4s and up to 8.5. Glove cutting is a wonderful trade. Was, anyway. Everything now was. A cutter like Al always had a shirt and tie on. In those days, a cutter never worked without a shirt and tie. You could work at 75 and 80 years old, too. They could start in the way Al did, at 15 or even younger, and they could go to 80. 70 was a spring chicken, and they could work at their leisure, Saturday and Sunday. These people could work constantly. Money to send their kids to school, money to fix up their homes nicely. Al could take a piece of leather, say to me, for a gag, "What do you want, Lou? 8 9/16?" And just snip it off without the ruler, measuring it perfectly with just his eye. The cutter was the prima donna. But all that pride of craftsmanship is gone, of course. Of the actual table cutters who could cut a 16-button white glove, I think Al Haberman may have been the last guy in America who could do it. The long glove, of course, vanished. Another was. There was the 8-button glove, which became very popular, silk line, but that was gone by 65. We were already taking gloves that were longer, chopping off the tops, making shorties, and using the top to make another glove. From this point, where the thumb seam is, every inch on out, they used to put a button. So we still talk in terms of length of buttons. Thank God in 1960, Jackie Kennedy walked out there with a little glove to the wrist and a glove to the elbow and a glove above the elbow and a pillbox hat, and all of a sudden gloves were in style again. First lady of the glove industry wore a size 6.5. People in the glove industry were praying to that lady. She herself stocked up in Paris, but so what? That woman put the lady's fine leather glove back on the map. But when they assassinated Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy left the White House, that and the miniskirt was the end of the lady's fashion glove. The assassination of John F. Kennedy and the arrival of the miniskirt, and together, that was the death knell for the ladies' dress glove. Till then, it was a 12-month, year-round business. There was a time when a woman would not go out unless she wore a pair of gloves, even in the spring and the summer. Now the glove is for cold weather or for driving or for sports. Lou, his wife said, nobody is talking about... Let me finish, please. Don't interrupt me, please. Al Haberman was a great reader. No schooling, but he loved to read. His favorite author was Sir Walter Scott, and Sir Walter Scott, in one of his classic books, gets an argument going between the glove maker and the shoemaker about who is the better craftsman, and the glove maker wins the argument. You know what he says? All you do, he tells the shoemaker, is make a mitten for the foot. You don't have to articulate around each toe. But Sir Walter Scott was the son of a glover, so it makes sense he would win the argument. You didn't know Sir Walter Scott was the son of a glover? You know who else, aside from Sir Walter and my two sons? William Shakespeare. Father was a glover who couldn't read and write his own name. You know what Romeo says to Juliet when she's up on the balcony? Everybody knows. Romeo, Romeo, where are you, Romeo? That she says. But what does Romeo say? I started in a tannery when I was 13, but I can answer for you because of my friend Al Haberman, who since has passed away, unfortunately. 73 years old, he came out of the house, slipped on the ice, broke his neck. Terrible. He told me this. Romeo says, "See the way she leans her cheek on her hand? I only wish I was the glove on that hand so I could touch that cheek." Shakespeare, most famous author in history. Lou, dear, Sylvia Lvov said again softly, what does this have to do with what everybody is talking about? Please, he said, and impatiently, with one hand, without even looking at her, waved away her objection. And McGovern, he went on, this is an idea I don't follow at all. What does McGovern have to do with that lousy movie? I voted for McGovern. I campaigned in the whole condominium for McGovern. You should hear what I put up with from Jewish people, how Nixon was this for Israel and that for Israel. And I reminded them, in case they forgot, that Harry Truman had him pegged for Tricky Dicky back in 1948. And now look, the reward they're reaping, my good friends, who voted for Mr. Von Nixon and his stormtroopers. Let me tell you who goes to those movies. Riffraff, bums, and kids without adult supervision. Why my son takes his lovely wife to such a movie is something I'll go to my grave not understanding. To see, said Marcia, how the other half lives. My daughter-in-law is a lady. She has no interest in those things. Lou, his wife said to him, maybe not everybody sees it your way. I cannot believe that. These are intelligent, educated people. You put too much stock in intelligence, Marcia teased him. It doesn't annihilate human nature. That's human nature, those movies. Tell me, why do you tell your children about the movie when they ask? That it's good, wholesome fun? You don't have to tell them a thing, Marcia said. They don't ask. These days, they just go. And what puzzled him, of course, was that what was happening these days did not seem to displease her. A professor, a Jewish professor, with children. I wouldn't say children are going, Shelley Salzman put in, as much seemingly to disrupt the unpromising dialogue as to give comfort to the Swede's father. I would say adolescents. And Dr. Salzman, you approve of this? Shelley smiled at the title Lou Lvov insisted on using with him after all these years. Shelley was a pale, plump, round-shouldered man in a bow tie and a seersucker jacket, a hard-working family doctor who couldn't keep the kindness out of his voice. The pallor and the posture, the old-fashioned steel-rimmed glasses, the hairless crown of his head, the wiry white curls above his ears, this unstudied lack of luster had made the Swede feel particularly sorry for him during the months of the love affair with Sheila Salzman. Yet he, nice Dr. Salzman, had harbored Mary in his house, hidden her not only from the FBI, but from him, her father, the person she needed most in the world. And I was the one, the Swede was thinking, guilty over my secret, even as Shelley was gently saying to the Swede's father, my approval or disapproval is beside the point of whether they go to those movies or not. When Dawn had first proposed going for a facelift to the clinic of a Geneva doctor that she had read about in Vogue, a doctor they didn't know, a procedure they knew nothing about, the Swede had quietly contacted Shelley Salzman and went off to see him alone in his office. Their own family doctor was a man the Swede respected, a cautious and thorough elderly man who would have counseled the Swede and answered his questions and tried, on the Swede's behalf, to dissuade Dawn from the idea. But instead the Swede had called Shelley and asked if he might come over to talk about a family problem. Only when he got to Shelley's office did he understand that he had gone there to confess, 4 years after the fact, to having had the affair with Sheila in the aftermath of Mary's disappearance. When Shelley smiled and asked, "How can I help you?" the Swede found himself on the brink of saying, "By forgiving me." Throughout the conversation, every time the Swede spoke, he had to quash the impulse to tell Shelley everything, to say, "I'm not here because of the facelift. I'm here because I did what I should never have done. I betrayed my wife. I betrayed you. I betrayed myself." But saying this would be a betrayal of Sheila, would it not? He could no more justify his taking it solely upon himself to confess to a husband than he could had she taken it upon herself to confess to his wife. However much he might yearn to be rid of a secret that stained and oppressed him, and imagine that a confession might unburden him, did he have the right to free himself at Sheila's expense? At Shelley's expense? At Dawn's expense? No. There was such a thing as ethical stability. No, he could not be so ruthlessly self-regarding. A cheap stunt, a treacherous stunt, and one that probably wouldn't pay off in long-term relief. Yet each time the Swede opened his mouth to speak, he needed desperately to say to this kindly man, "I was the lover of your wife." To seek from Shelley Salzman the magical restitution of equilibrium that Dawn must be hoping she'd find in Geneva. But instead, he only told Shelley how against the facelift he was, only enumerated his reasons against it, and then, to his surprise, listened to Shelley telling him that Dawn had perhaps begun to entertain a potentially promising idea. "If she thinks this will help her start over again," Shelley said, "why not give her the opportunity? Why not give this woman every opportunity? There's nothing wrong with it, Seymour. This is life. Not a life sentence, but life. Nothing immoral about having a facelift, nothing frivolous about a woman wanting one. She found the idea in Vogue magazine. That shouldn't throw you off. She only found what she was looking for. You don't know how many women come to me who've been through a terrible trauma, and they want to talk about something or other, and what turns out to be on their mind is just this: plastic surgery, and without Vogue magazine. The emotional and psychological implications can turn out to be something. The relief they get, those that get relief, is not to be minimized. I can't say I know how it happens. I'm not saying it always happens, but I've seen it happen again and again. Women who've lost their husbands, who've been seriously ill. You don't look like you believe me. But the Swede knew what he looked like a man with Sheila written all over his face. I know, said Shelley. It seems like a purely physical way of dealing with something profoundly emotional, but for many people it's a wonderful survival strategy. And Dawn may be one of them. I don't think you want to be puritanical about this. If Dawn feels strongly about a facelift, and if you were to go along with her, if you were to support her. Later that same day, Shelley phoned the Swede at the factory. He made some inquiries about Dr. LaPlante. We've got people as good as him here, I'm sure, but if you want to go to Switzerland and get away and let her recuperate there, why not? This LaPlante is tops. Shelley, thanks, it's awfully kind of you, said the Swede, disliking himself more than ever in the light of Shelley's generosity. And yet, this was the same guy who, with his co-conspirator wife, had provided Mary a hiding place not only from the FBI, but from her father and mother. A fact about as fantastic as a fact could be. What kind of mask is everyone wearing? I thought these people were on my side. But the mask is all that's on my side. That's it. For 4 months, I wore the mask myself, with him, with my wife. And I could not stand it. I went there to tell him that I'd betrayed him, and only didn't so as not to compound the betrayal, and never once did he let on how cruelly he betrayed me. My approval or disapproval, Shelley had been saying to Lulevov, is beside the point of whether they go to those movies or not. But you're a physician, the Swede's father insisted. A respected person, an ethical person, a responsible person. Lou, said his wife, maybe, dear, you're monopolizing the conversation. Let me finish, please. To the table at large, he asked, Am I monopolizing the conversation? Absolutely not, said Marcia, throwing an arm good-naturedly across his back. It's delightful to hear your delusions. I don't know what that means, he told her. It means social conditions may have altered in America since you were taking the kids to eat at the Chinks, and Al Haberman was cutting gloves in a shirt and tie. Really, Dawn said to her, they've altered? Nobody told us. And to contain herself, got up and left for the kitchen. Waiting there for Dawn's instructions were a couple of local high school girls who helped to do the serving and the cleaning up whenever the Lvovs had dinner guests. Marcia was to one side of Lou Lvov, Jessie Orcutt to the other. Jessie's new glass of scotch, which she must have managed to pour for herself in the kitchen, he had picked up from her place and moved out of her reach only minutes into the cold cucumber soup. When she then made a move to leave the table, he would not allow her to get up. Just sit, he told her. Sit and eat. You don't need that. You need food. Eat your dinner. Each time she so much as shifted in her chair, he laid a hand firmly on her as to remind her she was going nowhere. A dozen candles burned in 2 tall ceramic candelabra, and to the Swede, who sat flanked by his mother and Sheila Saltzman, everyone's eyes, deceptively enough, even Marcia's eyes, appeared blessed in that light with spiritual understanding, with kindly lucidity, alive with all the meaning one so craves to find in one's friends. Sheila, like Barry, was on hand every year at Labor Day because of what she had come to mean to his folks. On the phone to Florida, the Swede almost never got through a conversation without his father's asking, "And how is that lovely Sheila, that lovely woman, how is she doing?" "She's such a dignified woman," his mother said. "Such a refined person. Isn't she Jewish, darling? Your father says no. He insists she isn't." Why this disagreement should persist for years, he couldn't understand exactly. But the subject of fair-haired Sheila Saltzman's religious origins had proved indispensable to his parents' lives. To Dawn, who'd been trying for decades to be as tolerant of the Swede's imperfect parents as he was of her imperfect mother, this was their most inexplicable preoccupation, their most enraging as well, particularly as Dawn knew that, for her adolescent daughter, Sheila had something Dawn didn't have, that somehow Mary had come to trust the speech therapist in a way she no longer trusted her mother. "Are there no Jewish blondes in the world other than you?" Dawn asked him. "It hasn't anything to do with her appearance," the Swede explained. "It has to do with Mary." "What does her being Jewish have to do with Mary?" "I don't know. She was the speech therapist. They're in awe of her," the Swede said, "because of all she did for Mary. She wasn't the child's mother by any chance, or was she?" "They know that, darling," calmly answered the Swede. "But because of the speech therapy, they've made her into some kind of magician." And so had he. Not so much while she was Mary's therapist, when he had merely found her composure a curious stimulus to sexual imaginings, but after Mary disappeared and grief absconded with his wife. Thrown violently off his own narrow perch, he felt an intangible need open hugely within him, a need with no bottom to it, and he yielded to a solution so foreign to him that he didn't even recognize how improbable it was. The quiet, thoughtful woman, who had once made Mary less strange to herself, by teaching her how to overcome her word phobias and to control the elaborate circumlocutionary devices that, paradoxically, only increased her child's sense of being out of control, was someone he found himself wanting to incorporate into himself. The man who had lived correctly within marriage for almost 20 years was determined to be senselessly, worshipfully in love. It was 3 months before he could begin to understand that this was no way around anything, and it was Sheila who had to tell him. He hadn't gotten a romantic mistress. He'd gotten a candid mistress. She sensibly told him what all his adoration of her meant, told him that he was no more himself with her than Dawn was Dawn at the psychiatric clinic, explained to him that he was out to sabotage everything, but he was in such a state that he went on anyway, telling her how, when they ran away together to Ponce, she could learn Spanish and teach techniques of speech therapy at the university there, and he could operate the business from his Ponce plant, and they could live in a modern hacienda up in the hills among the palms above the Caribbean. What she didn't tell him about was Mary in her house after the bombing, Mary hiding in her house. She told him everything except that. The candor stopped just where it should have begun. Was everyone's brain as unreliable as his? Was he the only one unable to see what people were up to? Did everyone slip around the way he did, in and out, 100 different times a day, go from being smart to being smart enough, to being as dumb as the next guy, to being the dumbest bastard who ever lived? Was it stupidity deforming him, the simpleton son of a simpleton father? Or was life just one big deception that everyone was onto, except him? This sense of inadequacy he might once have described to her. He could talk to Sheila, talk about his doubts, his bewilderment. All the serenity in her allowed for that, this magician of a woman who had given Mary the great opportunity that Mary had thrown away, who had supplanted with a wonderful floating feeling, according to Mary, half at least of her stutterer's frustration, the lucid woman whose profession was to give sufferers a second chance, the mistress who knew everything, including how to harbor a murderer. Sheila had been with Mary, and she had told him nothing. All the trust between them, like all the happiness he'd ever known, like the killing of Fred Conlon, like everything, had been an accident. She'd been with Mary and said nothing. And said nothing now. The eagerness with which others spoke seemed, under the peculiar intensity of her gaze, to strike her as a branch of pathology. Why would anyone say that? She herself was to say nothing all evening, nothing about Linda Lovelace or Richard Nixon or H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman, her advantage over other people being that her head was not filled by what filled everybody else's head. This way of hers, of lying in wait behind herself, the Swede had once taken to be a mark of her superiority. Now he thought, icy bitch. Why? Once she had said to him, the influence you allow others to have on you, it's absolute. Nothing so captivates you as another person's needs. And he had said, I think you're describing Sheila Salzman. And as always, he was wrong. He thought she was omniscient, and all she was cold. Whirling about inside him now was a frenzied distrust of everyone. The excision of certain assurances, the last assurances, made him feel as though he had gone in one day from being 5 to being 100. It would give him comfort, he thought. It would help him right then if, of all things, he knew that resting out in the pasture beyond their dinner table was Dawn's herd, with Count, the big bull, protecting them. If Dawn still had Count, if only Count, a relief-filled, reality-less moment passed before he realized that of course it would be a comfort to have Count roaming the dark pasture among the cows, because then Mary would be roaming among the guests. Here, Mary, in her circus pajamas, leaning up against the back of her father's chair, whispering into her father's ear, "Mrs. Orcutt drinks whiskey. Mrs. Umanoff has B.O. Dr. Salzman is bald." A mischievous intelligence that was utterly harmless, back then unanarchic and childish, and well within bounds. Meanwhile, he heard himself saying, "Dad, take some more steak," in what he knew was a hopeless effort, a good son's effort, to get his self-abandoned father to be, if not tranquil, less insistently chagrined over the inadequacies of the non-Jewish human race. "I'll tell you who I'll take some steak for this young lady." Spearing a slice from the platter that one of the serving girls was holding beside him, he dumped it onto Jessie's plate. He had taken Jessie on as a full-scale project. "Now, pick up your knife and fork and eat," he told her. "You could use some red meat. Sit up straight." And as though she believed he could well resort to violence if she did otherwise, Jessie Orcutt drunkenly mumbled, "I was going to," but began to fiddle with the meat in such a clumsy way that the Swede feared his father was going to start cutting her food for her. All that crude energy, try as it might, could not remake the troubled world. But this is serious business, this children business. Having gotten Jessie taking nourishment, he was in a state again about deep throat. "If that isn't serious, what is anymore?" "Dad," said the Swede, "what Shelley is saying is not that it's not serious. He agrees it's serious. He's saying that once you've made your case to an adolescent child, you've made your case, and you can't then take these kids and lock them up in their rooms and throw away the key." His daughter was an insane murderer hiding on the floor of a room in Newark. His wife had a lover who dry-humped her over the sink in their family kitchen. His ex-mistress had knowingly brought disaster upon his house, and he was trying to propitiate his father with on the one hand this and on the other hand that. "You'd be surprised," Shelley told the old man, "how much the kids today have learned to take in their stride. But degrading things should not be taken in their stride. I say lock them in their rooms if they take this in their stride. I remember when kids used to be at home doing their homework and not out seeing movies like this. This is the morality of a country that we're talking about. Well, isn't it? Am I nuts? It's an affront to decency and to decent people." "And what," Marcia asked him, "is so inexhaustibly interesting about decency?" The question so surprised him that it left him looking a little frantically around the table for somebody with an opinion learned enough to subdue this woman. It turned out to be Orcutt, that great friend of the family. Bill Orcutt was coming to Lulabov's aid. "And what is wrong with decency?" Orcutt asked, smiling broadly at Marcia. The Swede couldn't look at him. On top of all the things he couldn't think about, there were two people, Sheila and Orcutt, he could not look at. Did Dawn consider Bill Orcutt handsome? He never thought so. Round face, snout nose, puckering lower lip. Piggy-looking bastard. Must be something else that drove it to that frenzy over the kitchen sink. What? The easy assurance? Was that what got it going? The comfort taken by Bill Orcutt in being Bill Orcutt? His contentment in being Bill Orcutt? Was it because he wouldn't dream of slighting you, even if both you and he knew that you weren't up to snuff? Was it his appropriateness that got her going like that? The flawless appropriateness? How very appropriately he played his role as steward of the Morris County past? Was it the sense he exuded of never having had to grub for anything, or take shit from anyone, or be at a loss as to how to behave even when the wife on his arm was a hopeless drunk? Was it because he'd entered the world expecting things not even a weak-wake 3 Letterman begins to expect, that none of us begin to expect? That the rest of us, even if we get those things by working our asses off for them, still never feel entitled to? Was that why she was in heat over the sink? Because of his inbred sense of entitlement? Or was it the laudable environmentalism? Or was it the great art? Or was it simply his cock?
Is that it, Dawn, dear? I want an answer. I want it tonight. Is it just his cock? The Swede could not stop imagining the particulars of Orcutt fucking his wife any more than he could stop imagining the particulars of the rapist fucking his daughter. Tonight, the imagining would not let him be. Decency? Marcia said to Orcutt, foxily smiling back at him. Much overvalued, wouldn't you say, the seductions of decency and civility and convention? Not the richest response to life I can think of. So what do you recommend for richness, Orcutt asked her? The high road of transgression? The patrician architect was amused by the literature professor and the menacing figure she tried to cut in order to appall the squares. Amused he was, amused. But the Swede couldn't turn the dinner party into a battle for his wife. Things were bad enough without colliding with Orcutt in front of his parents. All he had to do was to not listen to him. Yet each time that Orcutt spoke, every word antagonized him, convulsed him with spite and hatred and sinister thoughts. And when Orcutt wasn't speaking, the Swede was constantly looking down the table to see what in God's name there was in that face that could so excite his wife. Well, Marcia was saying, without transgression, there isn't very much knowledge, is there? My God, cried Lulava, that's one I never heard before. Excuse me, Professor, but where the hell do you get that idea? The Bible, said Marcia deliciously, for a start. The Bible? Which Bible? The one that begins with Adam and Eve. Isn't that what they tell us in Genesis? Isn't that what the Garden of Eden story is telling us? What? Telling us what? Without transgression, there is no knowledge. Well, that ain't what they taught me, he replied, about the Garden of Eden, but then I never got past the 8th grade. What did they teach you, Lou? That when God above tells you not to do something, you damn well don't do it, that's what. Do it, and you pay the piper. Do it, and you will suffer from it for the rest of your days. Obey the good Lord above, said Marcia, and all the terrible things will vanish. Well, yes, he replied, though without conviction, realizing that he was being mocked. Look, we are way off the subject. We are not talking about the Bible. Forget the Bible. This is no place to talk about the Bible. We are talking about a movie where a grown woman, from all reports, goes in front of a movie camera and for money, openly, for millions and millions of people to see, children, everyone, does everything she can think of that is degrading. That's what we're talking about. Degrading to whom? Marcia asked him. To her, for God's sakes. Number one, her. She has made herself into the scum of the earth. You can't tell me you're in favor of that. She hasn't made herself into the scum of anything, Lou. To the contrary, said Orcutt, laughing. She has eaten of the tree of knowledge. And, announced Marcia, made herself into a superstar. The highest of the high. I think Miss Lovelace is having the time of her life. Adolf Hitler had the time of his life, Professor, shoveling Jews into the furnace. That does not make it right. This is a woman who is poisoning young minds, poisoning the country, and in the bargain she is making herself the scum of the earth, period. There was nothing inactive in Lou Lvov when he argued, and it looked as though just observing the phenomenon of an opinionated old man fettered still to his fantasy of the world was all that was prompting Marcia to persist, to bait and bite and draw blood. Her sport. The Swede wanted to kill her. Leave him alone. Leave him alone, and he'll shut up. It's no big deal getting him to say more and more and more, so stop it. But this problem that he had so long ago learned to circumnavigate, in part by subduing his own personality, seemingly subjugating it to his father's while maneuvering around Lou where he could, the problem of the father, of maintaining filial love against the onslaught of an unrelenting father, was not a problem that she had decades of experience integrating into her life. Jerry just told their father to fuck off. Dawn was driven almost crazy by him, and Sylvia Lvov stoically and impatiently endured him, her only successful form of resistance being to freeze him out and live with the isolation, and see more of herself evaporating year by year. But Marcia took him on as the fool he was, for still believing in the power of his indignation to convert the corruptions of the present into the corruptions of the past. So what would you want her to be instead, Lou? A cocktail waitress? Marcia asked. Why not? That's a job. Not much of one, Marcia replied. Not one that would interest anyone here. Oh, said Lou Lvov. They'd prefer what she does instead? I don't know, said Marcia. We'll have to poll the girls. Which would you prefer, she said to Sheila, cocktail waitress or porn star? But Sheila wasn't about to be engulfed in Marcia's mockery, and with eyes that seemed to stare past it and right on through to the egotism, she gave her unequivocal reply. The Swede remembered that after Sheila had first met Marcia and Barry Umanoff here, at the old Rimrock house, he had asked her, how can he love this person? And instead of answering him as Dawn did, because he's a ballless wonder, Sheila had replied, by the end of a dinner party, everybody is probably thinking that about somebody. Sometimes everybody is thinking that about everybody. Do you? He asked her. I think that about couples all the time, she said. The wise woman. And yet, this wise woman had harbored a murderer. What about Dawn? Marcia asked. Cocktail waitress or porno actress? Smiling sweetly, exhibiting her best Catholic schoolgirl posture, the girl who makes the nuns happy by sitting at her desk without slouching, Dawn said, Up yours, Marcia. What kind of conversation is this? Lou Lvov asked. A dinner conversation, Sylvia Lvov replied. And what makes you so blasé? He asked her. I'm not blasé, I'm listening. Now, Bill Orcutt said, Nobody's polled you, Marcia. Which would you prefer, assuming you had the choice? She laughed merrily at the slighting innuendo. Oh, they've got big fat mamas in dirty movies. They too appear in the dreams of men. And not only for comic relief. Listen, you folks are too hard on Linda. Why is it that if a girl takes off her clothes in Atlantic City, it's for a scholarship and makes her an American goddess, but if she takes off her clothes in a sex flick, it's for filthy money and makes her a whore? Why is that? Why? All right, nobody knows, but seriously, folks, I love this word, scholarship. A hooker comes to a hotel room. The guy asks her how much she gets. She says, well, if you want blank, I get a $300 scholarship. And if you want blank blank, I get a $500 scholarship. And if you want blank blank blank, Marcia, said Dawn, try as you will, you can't get under my skin tonight. Can't I? Not tonight. There was a beautiful floral arrangement at the center of the table. From Dawn's garden, Lou Lvov had told them all proudly as they were sitting down to eat. There were also large platters of the beefsteak tomatoes sliced thickly, dressed in oil and vinegar, and encircled by slices of red onion fresh from the garden. And there were 2 wooden buckets, old feed buckets, that they'd picked up at a junk shop in Clinton for $1 apiece, each lined gaily with a red bandana and brimming with the ears of corn that Orcutt had helped her shuck. Cradled in wicker baskets near either end of the table were freshly baked loaves of French bread, those new baguettes from McPherson's, reheated in the oven and pleasant to tear apart with your hands. And there was good, strong Burgundy wine, 6 bottles of the Swede's best pomard, 4 of them open on the table, bottles that 5 years back he had laid down for drinking in 1973, according to his wine register. Pomards laid down in his cellar just 1 month to the day before Mary killed Dr. Conlon. Yes, earlier in the evening he had found 1368 inscribed in his handwriting in the spiral notebook he used for recording the details of each new purchase. 1368 he had written, with no idea that on 2368 his daughter would go ahead and outrage all of America, except perhaps for Professor Marcia Umanoff. The 2 high school kids who were doing the serving emerged from the kitchen every few minutes, silently offering around the steaks he cooked, arranged on pewter platters, all carved up and running with blood. The sweet set of carving knives were from Hofritz, the best German stainless steel. He'd gone over to New York to buy the set and the big carving block for their first Thanksgiving in the old Rimrock house. He once had cared about all that stuff, loved to hone the blade on the long conical file before he went after the bird, loved the sound of it, the sad inventory of his domestic bounty, wanted his family to have the best, wanted his family to have everything. Please, said Lulova, can I get an answer about the effect of this on the children? You're all way, way off the topic. Haven't we seen enough tragedy with the young children, pornography, drugs, the violence, divorce? Marcia threw in to help him out. Professor, don't get me started on divorce. You understand French? He asked her. I do if I have to, she said, laughing. Well,
I got a son down in Florida, Seymour's brother, whose specialité is divorce. I thought his specialité was cardiac surgery, but no, it's divorce. I thought I sent him to medical school. I thought that's where all the bills were coming from, but no, it was divorce school. That's what he got the diploma in, divorce. Has there ever been a more terrible thing for a child than the specter of divorce? I don't think so. And where will it end? What is the limit? You didn't all grow up in that kind of world. Neither did I. We grew up in an era when it was a different place, when the feeling for community, home, family, parents were, well, it was different. The changes are beyond conception. I sometimes think that more has changed since 1945 than in all the years of history there have ever been. I don't know what to make of the end of so many things, the lack of feeling for individuals that a person sees in that movie, the lack of feeling for places like what is going on in Newark. How did this happen? You don't have to revere your family. You don't have to revere your country. You don't have to revere where you live, but you have to know you have them. You have to know that you're part of them, because if you don't, you're just out there on your own, and I feel for you. I honestly do. Am I right, Mr. Orcutt, or am I wrong? To wonder where the limit is? Orcutt replied. Well, yes, said Lulava, who, the Swede observed, and not for the first time, had spoken of children and violence without any sense that the subject intersected with the life of his immediate family.